Hello everyone, I am Jack from Cultaholic.com and it's time to take a look back at the year that was. 2018, what a fabulous 12 months we've had. We've had good pay-per-views, bad ones, middling ones, but how can we tell all of them apart? It's too confusing. I can't even remember what happened last week, let alone back in January. Don't worry, I'm here to save the day. I'm here to assign each WWE main roster pay-per-view a lovely old grade, and I'll give a little bit of a recap of each one as well. I'll talk about some of the good things, some of the bad things. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I cannot wait to get started. But there are two things I must mention before we do so. First of all, this will not simply be taking each individual grade we assign to each pay-per-view over the course of the year and then just slapping it on here with the same reasoning. Things change in hindsight. You know, you can look back on a pay-per-view and given the way things panned out or given the way that a match has aged nicely, like fine wine, you might have a slightly different perspective on it. So we like to think that this kind of reflects that. It's kind of a good look back upon 2018 in WWE. Also, the second thing is, obviously, you're going to disagree with some of the things I say. I think it would be rare for anybody watching this video to agree with each and every grade assigned to each and every pay-per-view, and that's fine, that's good. We want to encourage debate and discourse. Just please don't get really, really cross and upset if you think that, like, Backlash got hard done by. No one's going to think Backlash got hard done by. Let's crack on with it. This is every single WWE main roster pay-per-view of 2018 graded. We start things off, of course, with the Royal Rumble, but just before we do, I'm just going to, for those curious about NXT and how it didn't really see much of a point in doing an NXT one because there were only 5 takeovers and they were all absolutely excellent. But if you cared, Philadelphia got an A, New Orleans got an A+, Chicago 2 got an A, Brooklyn 4 got an A+, and War Games got an A+. Pretty strong year there, Triple H, mate. Well done. Now on to the first main roster pay-per-view of the year and everyone's favourite child, the Royal Rumble. This Royal Rumble I very much enjoyed, and I think since then, the impact of it may have been forgotten a little bit because the respective winners of the men's and women's Royal Rumble, Shinsuke Nakamura and Asuka, obviously went on to lose at WrestleMania. They were big old losers and then both ended a bit of a slump. Obviously, in recent days, Asuka has risen back to the top again, while Shinsuke, well, he's the US champion, but he's not really doing much with it, is he? But at the time, this was a legitimately exciting event, and I hope the grade I've given it reflects that. Of course, this event wasn't all good. There were some weak moments as well. There was Brock Lesnar versus Braun Strowman versus Kane for the Universal Championship. Kane just striding on in there to make the match loads better. Also, we had that weird handicap match between the reigning WWE champion AJ Styles against Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. I don't really know how they messed that up. We just wanted to see AJ Styles versus Kevin Owens or AJ Styles versus Sami Zayn. Not both with weird handicap rules and stuff and Shane McMahon getting involved. I didn't really enjoy. Just give us the match that we want. Just give us the match that we want. It's okay because the 2 Royal Rumbles were what we wanted. For me personally, I preferred the men's one, but I can totally see why you would have preferred the women's one. It was, after all, a more revolutionary, important, historic event, whereas I think the men's Rumble was just a really, really good Rumble, probably top 10 of all time, well, definitely top 10 of all time, maybe even top 5 of all time. Shinsuke won in big dramatic fashion, last eliminating Cena and Reigns, whereas over on the women's side of things, Asuka won, last eliminating Nikki Bella, and then obviously Ronda Rousey came out and arguably overshadowed the triumph, but it was nonetheless a huge moment. On the whole, I'm going to give this Royal Rumble show an A-. I thought it was really, really good. I thought there could have been slight things that were better on the undercard, but I gave it an A grade, an A- grade, because I think that the most important thing about the Royal Rumble is the Royal Rumble match itself. And with 2 Rumbles this year, it could have been a bit of a gamble if one of them had failed or not impressed very much. It could have ruined the show, but they both did impress. So I think it's deserving of a high grade. Next up, the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, which wasn't as good really, was it? I think the Women's Elimination Chamber was the high point of this pay-per-view, although there's one little bit that I remember that's kind of burned into my brain that's really weird. It was Alexa Bliss doing Twisted Bliss from the top of one of the pods onto Sasha Banks on the floor, but then Sasha Banks just no-sold it and slapped on the Banks statement. And basically it kind of made the whole thing a bit weird. I'm assuming she was meant to somehow nimbly reverse it, but that's a very difficult spot. And unfortunately, it's one of the things I remember most about that match too. On the other hand, we did have Sasha Banks betraying Bayley, and that was good at the time in the moment, but then later on, it just sort of fizzled out and went nowhere. Then they were friends again, then they fell out again, then they were friends again, then they fell out. And by the time Bayley eventually snapped, Kurt Angle made them be friends again, and it went nowhere. I'm still holding out for them to feud at some point, but for some reason, WWE are just determined not to let it happen on the main roster. The winner of the Women's Elimination Chamber match was Alexa Bliss, and she would carry her title forth into WrestleMania. Over on the men's side of things, this was really disappointing, lads, wasn't it, to be honest? It was, and obviously opinion has since softened on Roman Reigns for understandable reasons, but at the time, this was peak Roman Reigns booking that infuriated the fans. Basically, Braun Strowman destroyed everybody in the Elimination Chamber. I think he might have eliminated everyone apart from Roman Reigns, just about anyway. And then Reigns, spear, 1, 2, 3, Roman is going to WrestleMania. Get in there, Roman, because this match was for a title shot as well. It was for a bloody title shot. You might be asking, Jack, what about the undercard? You haven't even mentioned the undercard. I had to Google what was on the undercard. Can you remember anything on the undercard Elimination Chamber? Because I couldn't. And none of it was that good. Bit of a nothing undercard. On the whole, because there was only one match that I enjoyed, the Women's Elimination Chamber, I'm going to give this a D. It was one of the least eventful pay-per-views of the year. Now we move on to FastLane, which was of course a SmackDown exclusive pay-per-view. I forgot to mention that Elimination Chamber was Raw exclusive, but would SmackDown overshadow Raw and Elimination Chamber? The answer is yes, but only a little bit. This was a very middle-of-the-road pay-per-view. Middle-of-the-road, FastLane, you see what I'm doing? Oh my goodness me. Puns off the dome all day, accidentally as well. This was a bit of a middle-of-the-road pay-per-view until the main event, which was that very entertaining six-pack challenge to see who would carry the WWE Championship into WrestleMania. I guess the winner could be arguably a little bit of a predictable one because everyone wanted to see Styles versus Nakamura at Mania. Styles went in as champion and emerged champion as well, but they packed the match with enough dramatic moments, including John Cena trying desperately to get the belt so that he could have more leverage in challenging The Undertaker at Mania. But no, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a good way to finish an otherwise ordinary show. In fact, let's have a look at what else happened on the show because I can't remember off the top of my head. Randy Orton beat Rude for the United States Championship. Remember when Bobby Roode was US champion? My goodness. Charlotte beat Ruby Riott, and then Asuka came out and challenged her for WrestleMania, because up until this point, up until FastLane, Asuka hadn't revealed who she was going to face. She went for Charlotte, and you know what? We'll find out if Charlotte was ready for Asuka. She was ready for Asuka. FastLane gets a C. It was a perfectly alright show that balanced out well because it had a good main event. But again, a bit of a boring undercard. Now on to the big one, WrestleMania 34. Now, the thing is about grading WrestleManias is that the grade doesn't really matter as much at the end of the day. Whether it's a good Mania or a bad Mania, you always know you're in for a spectacle because it's WrestleMania. I would happily watch a bad WrestleMania and enjoy it, as I did in Dallas at WrestleMania 32. Loved it because I was there at WrestleMania. WrestleMania is always a spectacle, it's always amazing, and it's always the biggest night of the wrestling year. So you can't complain too much regardless of how good the show itself actually is. Of course, it always is nice for WrestleMania to be really good, and unfortunately this one wasn't like very top tier. I'd put it as like harmless and enjoyable. It was a mixed bag, but you know, whether it was something good or something bad, everything kind of sticks in the memory, so that's all right. Let's take a look at some of the more memorable things. Now, the first half of the show was absolutely stronger than the second half of the show. I remember on Twitter, as the first half of the show progressed, people were starting to say, this is on its way to being the best WrestleMania of all time, and then it obviously wasn't. But no, we opened things hot with that triple threat Intercontinental title match between Rollins, Balor, and Miz. We had Charlotte versus Asuka, which was wonderful, even if Asuka did lose, and Charlotte was ready for Asuka. We had John Cena completely cutting the women's moment short by running to the back because he'd heard that Undertaker was in the building. We had Ronda Rousey and Kurt Angle versus Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. Legitimately one of the most entertaining wrestling matches of the year. This was sports entertainment done right. The second half of the show sadly just couldn't live up to the first half at all, really. The bar was set too high and the booking got really bizarre. We had Daniel Bryan's really feel-good return, an understandably colossal moment, but the match itself wasn't that great. It was him and Shane against Owens and Zayn, and everyone just wanted to see Daniel Bryan kick some ass, not wait on the apron for ages for the best wrestler in the world, Shane, to tag in. More on that later on. We also had AJ versus Shinsuke, which didn't, I guess arguably couldn't live up to the hype of their original Wrestle Kingdom match over in New Japan. We had Nicholas Gate, obviously Braun Strowman, plucked Nicholas from the crowd, and a child helped him beat the Bar to become Raw Tag Team Champions. The poor Bar, Sheamus and Bloody Cesaro losing to a 10-year-old at WrestleMania, the grandest stage of them all. It's where you dream of getting at as a wrestler when you start out, and then you lose to a child. Then, of course, we had that main event where it just seemed like Roman Reigns was going to beat Brock Lesnar, and even though no one was going to be really particularly happy about it, because Roman was the anointed golden boy, and it's never fun to see the corporate machine's favourite win, it would have at least meant that we had a champion who was there week in and week out rather than Brock Lesnar. And then Lesnar pulled some crazy business shenanigans backstage and somehow just bested Vince in a game of contract chicken. I don't really know what happened, but he won and he cut Roman open and he just walked out. And it was a very abrupt, very disappointing end to WrestleMania. I'm going to give the whole show a B-. It was a hard grade to assign just because I didn't really know what to go for. The first half was so good, the second half was so weird and occasionally bad. But I think B- reflects how fun a show it was overall. Now we've had the Royal Rumble, which got an A-. Now it's time to talk about the better show. We don't even need to give it a grade because it says it's better. We're going to talk about the greatest Royal Rumble. Better than 92, better than 2001, better than one of my personal favourites, 2010, better than any Rumble you can imagine, because it says it on the tin. The greatest Royal Rumble. This is the greatest show. We light it up, we won. Now, aside from all the strange welcome to the great city of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, come on in, it's great for tourism, and regardless of all that, this was a really uneventful show for the most part. We had John Cena and Triple H demonstrating that by just basically wrestling a house show match to start things off, and that really set the tone. This was essentially the biggest house show ever. There were only really two matches that stood out in a good way. The Cruiserweight Championship match between Cedric and Kalisto. They both actually tried to wrestle an entertaining match, bless them. Also, the Intercontinental title ladder match was good too, but it was kind of predictable that the belt wasn't really going to change hands. I don't think any of the belts changed hands on this show, but certainly not in that match because it involved SmackDown guys too, and you knew they weren't going to switch the belt over to the SmackDown side of things. It just wasn't going to happen. Then, of course, we had the rematch between Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, or the cage fiasco as I've written it in my notes here, because it was weird. The finish was odd. Basically, Roman Reigns speared Brock Lesnar through the cage, and then it wasn't clear who hit first and stuff, but they awarded it to Lesnar, the match. And then later on the next week, the referee came out and apologised and went, yo, I got it wrong. Roman Reigns should have been champion. He is the biggest of all the dogs. Then it was topped up, of course, by the greatest Royal Rumble match itself for a huge trophy and the greatest Royal Rumble championship, which we've never seen since. Braun Strowman won. Daniel Bryan was like the marathon man, but it's remembered chiefly for one thing. And it's not that random sumo lad who ran in, and it's not the fact that Roderick Strong was in it, which was a nice surprise actually. No, it's Titus World Slide. Titus O'Neil running headlong down the ramp and just falling. And honestly, it could have gone really nastily, but he luckily tripped under the ring rather than into one of the support beams, horribly injuring himself. He was fine, just very embarrassed, and we still haven't forgotten it. And I missed it on our live reactions because I went to the toilet. And it's a big regret to this day. This gets a D-. It wasn't really a fun show, it was a bit of a slog. And the tourism stuff kind of pissed people off more than the action did. The action was harmless, but the whole propaganda stuff didn't really sit well with people, but just wait until Crown Jewel a bit later on. But then WWE did something very generous. They tried to make the Saudi Arabia show look better than it was by giving us a proper, actual main roster pay-per-view, not like a glorified house show in Saudi Arabia, like a proper actual part of the calendar year, and they made it worse than the Greatest Royal Rumble. Really selfless of them to please the Saudis and then just sort of go, no, the Greatest Royal Rumble was all right, because look how bad Backlash was. Backlash got a lot of hate, and rightly so. This show was so disliked that later on in the year, sometimes there'd be a week pay-per-view or a week match in a pay-per-view, and Twitter would light up with people going, hey, at least it's not as bad as Backlash, which is weird because I forgot that this show opened with an absolute banger, one of the best pay-per-view matches of the year for WWE. The Miz and Seth Rollins absolutely tearing the house down. But then it just turned into a very, very uninspiring show. We had Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, two of the most charismatic heels on the entire roster, just jobbing out clean to Lashley and Strowman, and it was just depressing to watch. We had AJ and Nakamura, who at one point should have been the hottest feud in all of wrestling, kicking one another in the balls to end a match in comical fashion. Also, we had Roman Reigns versus Samoa Joe. Everyone was excited to see Samoa Joe get his title shot, and the match was almost deliberately a boring one, full of rest holds. I guess to annoy the crowd in theory, to get heat on Joe, but really, it just got heat on the entire match, and by the time Roman Reigns won, people were walking out of the building. Backlash, unfortunately, gets an E grade, one of the worst received shows of the year. But not the worst one. We'll get to that in a bit. I know you know which one it is, but just pretend for me right now, okay? But then WWE bounced back with a very enjoyable Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Not a perfect show, but one full of exciting moments, which is pretty much all you can ask for when it comes to Money in the Bank. That's what you want excitement. Both the Money in the Bank ladder matches were good. The women's one was better than the previous year when James Ellsworth won. And even though they did it again on SmackDown, I still think this year's Money in the Bank ladder match was the best women's Money in the Bank ladder match so far. This event was also the first kind of inklings where we saw just how huge Becky Lynch was going to be. We all know that she's obviously very popular since the start of her main roster run, basically, but in this match, the crowd were particularly molten hot for her. Watch this match back and watch every time she gets close to that briefcase, everyone's just going, go on, you can do it. She couldn't do it, Alexa Bliss did it, and everyone got a little bit annoyed at that. I didn't mind it too much, and as we'd see, once she cashed in the briefcase later on this same night, she would go on to become a transitional champion for a fair purpose. Braun Strowman won the men's ladder match, becoming the Monster in the Bank, and we all know how that went for him, and if you don't know how that went for him, just look at him now. He's no longer got the Money in the Bank contract, and he isn't the Universal Champion, so you can probably see what's happened there. Not all of the matches were good. Asuka and Carmella had a match that was infuriating. It made Asuka look like an idiot. Big Cass and Daniel Bryan had a match that just was very uninspiring, and everyone was like, how can Daniel Bryan's return to wrestling have reached this stage already? He's already being put in boring matches. It's already flat. Luckily, things would very much pick up for Daniel Bryan towards the end of the year, but at the moment, it looked kind of like worrying for him. But there were good moments. I enjoyed Alexa's cash in the middle of Ronda versus Nia. Ronda continued to impress, and yeah, it was just a solid show. Gonna give it a B+. I did enjoy this one. I think I might have enjoyed it more than most, but I thought it was a pretty good show. Next up, Extreme Rules, which was a frustrating show full of frustrating things, and one that is mostly remembered for this noise. And you know, the action on this show wasn't all bad, as you'll see from the grade I give it, which might be a tad kinder than you may have imagined, but the booking really let it down. So Rollins and Ziggler poured their hearts into their Iron Man match, but it was booked weirdly and the crowd just didn't help at all. Carmella and Asuka, again, Asuka was made to look like a fool because of the involvement of Ellsworth and the fact that she fell for it again. Yeah, it wasn't perfect. Things kept going wrong. I guess the best match of the night was AJ Styles versus Rusev, but the result was never in doubt. We always knew that Rusev wasn't going to win the belt, especially with AJ in the midst of his long and impressive reign. I'm going to give Extreme Rules a D. Yeah, the action was alright, but the booking was bad. I think case in point is the fact that Kevin Owens took a sick bump off the side of the cage to technically beat Braun Strowman, and then he was portrayed as a big old loser for being chucked off the side of the cage and taking a sick bump. But he won the match. But we were all meant to laugh at him because he fell through the table. But he won. If Mick Foley had done that, he'd be a hero, so I didn't get it. That sums up the event for me. Kind of cool action sometimes, massively let down by the booking. Now on to SummerSlam, an event I have called in my notes the big eventful. Lots of things went down on this show. Not all of them good, but all of them big. Like, big things were going on. Roman Reigns finally beat Brock Lesnar to win the Universal Championship and tear it away from the absentee champion that was Lesnar. Also, Vince McMahon outfoxed all of us by having Braun Strowman announce his intention to cash in before the match and then never get a chance to do so. But before we could work out that that's what had happened, the show went off the air. The show finished, and apparently the live crowd were really upset. But as a show ending, it did work. It was a sneaky old promoter trick from Vince there, lest we underestimate him in his old age. Ronda Rousey absolutely squashed Alexa Bliss to become the Raw Women's Champion. A huge moment, not just because it was the result that made Cultaholic beat WrestleTalk in the predictions contest, but also because it was the start of Ronda Rousey's reign, which I'm sure will be looked back upon as a very key moment for women's wrestling. We also had The Miz beating Daniel Bryan, which at the time seemed like a good idea, but then the feud fizzled out in a big way, so maybe it wasn't the best in hindsight, especially what happened with Bryan later on. And we also had Samoa Joe saying the word daddy, which just made Ross's year, his favourite moment, I believe, of 2018. I'm going to give SummerSlam a B. I thought that it didn't all click, it didn't all work, but the things that did work worked well, and the things that didn't work were at least memorable, such as Daddy Gay. Eat my ass, Daddy, as Ross would say. Oh no, why have I said it? I've never said that on video before. Oh, let's move on. Now on to the show that I think most of you are going to disagree with, because I've seen online loads of people loved this show. They thought it was great. I thought it was okay, but I'm not going to give it like an A or anything, so everyone just calm down. It's time for Hell in a Cell. This was a strong show mostly, and for a while it looked like it was on its way to being one of the better pay-per-views of the year for WWE, but then in my opinion, it fell off in a major way. But we got things off to a hot start with Randy Orton torturing and slowly killing Jeff Hardy in a Hell in a Cell match. That match was brutal, but it was awesome at the same time. Becky Lynch won the SmackDown Women's Championship. It was like a flash pinfall. I remember Charlotte charged for the spear or the natural selection, one of the two, and Becky just reversed it into some kind of like power slam type of suplex effort and just quickly pinned her, and everyone was like, whoa, Becky's the champion, it's what we've wanted all along. And it was awesome as well because she turned heel at SummerSlam, but in 2018, if someone turns heel, it doesn't mean that they're a bad guy, it just means they're even cooler. So Becky's like reign as the champ and the man started here, and it was a huge moment. There was an awesome tag match between The Shield and Drew and Dolph, which doesn't sound good in hindsight because they've faced each other so many times, but this was a really good match. And then things took a bit of a nosedive. We had some bad things. We had Ronda's least spectacular outing with her injured ribs against Alexa Bliss in like a rematch, which wasn't really necessary. No one really wanted to see the rematch. It wasn't anyone's fault in the match, it's just a match that no one really wanted to see, and a match that couldn't really succeed no matter how hard they tried. We also had Miz and Maurice versus Brie and Bryan, which nobody really wanted to see. We had AJ luckily winning against Joe, the babyface, being fortunate to beat the heel, which was weird, like the heel was right to be aggrieved after the match. And we had the main event, the Hell in a Cell match for Braun Strowman's Money in the Bank title shot opportunity thing. And basically it was a Hell in a Cell match, Strowman versus Reigns, and it got called off. A Hell in a Cell match was ruled a no contest, and that is what really ruined this pay-per-view for me. The pay-per-view was called Hell in a Cell, by the way, and it was a no contest. The match was entertaining for the most part. You know, allies of Roman got involved, allies of Braun got involved, and then Brock Lesnar came back, and despite both men putting each other through Hell in a Cell for the whole match, he came in, hit them both, I think, with a section of table or a section of the cage wall for a bit, hit them with an F5 each, and the referee went, that's enough, they've had too much punishment. And I was like, are you joking? I saw Roman Reigns take about 7 F5s at WrestleMania 34 and kick out of nearly each one of them. This really dragged it down for me. Hell in a Cell should have been like an A grade. It should have been one of the best WWE pay-per-views of the year, and instead it gets a B-. Not just because of the main event, because of like the weird AJ and Joe finish, because of the mixed tag match that didn't go down very well and that sort of thing, but mainly because at Hell in a Cell, a Hell in a Cell match was ruled a no contest because Brock Lesnar did a thing. Next up, bloody hell, let's take a trip down under, you bloody bonzer, shrimp on the bar, but Super ShowDown from Melbourne, Australia. So the main thing here was the Triple H and Undertaker had a very tired main event, and then the big news that happened after it was that Shawn Michaels and Kane got involved and all set up what would happen slightly later on, which we'll get to in just a few minutes time. I can't wait to talk about it, guys. I cannot wait. The show was also notable because Daniel Bryan beat The Miz in about 2 minutes, and that was really strange because it was a number 1 contenders match, and at first I didn't like it, but in hindsight I think it was alright. I think that, as someone asked us on the podcast, and I can't remember the name, apologies, but someone said, you know what guys, wasn't this a good thing because it shows us that matches can end at any time and it keeps us on the edge of our seats more often. And I was like, he's bloody right. He's right, you know. Yeah, WWE haven't really used that to their advantage going forwards, but I thought that was okay in hindsight. Not too much of an issue with that. John Cena showed up from his vacation, and his months and months long vacation in China, shooting movies, growing his hair out, speaking in Mandarin. He showed up to help Bobby Lashley beat Elias and Kevin Owens, and just let the popular heels win this one, please. They don't even have to pin Cena, they can pin Lashley, and Lashley turned heel very soon after this event anyway, so it was monstrously frustrating. Becky Lynch got herself DQ'd to keep her title, which was also very frustrating. Just let her be babyface. This was like peak let Becky Lynch be babyface time. But the thing that the show was mainly remembered for, I guess, was a good one, which was Buddy Murphy winning the Cruiserweight Championship in his home country. Everyone went crazy, one of the best crowd reactions of the year, and it's enough to save Super ShowDown from a lackluster grade. I'm going to give it a C-. Thought it was a bit of a house show, a little bit Greatest Royal Rumble, but with enough flashpoints to make it alright, worthy of a C-. But the main event, man, that was a slog. Triple H and Taker, glad they didn't wrestle again. Ha! Oh, they did. Next up, Evolution, the first ever all-women's pay-per-view in WWE history, and it was bloody excellent. And a lot of people on Twitter went, no it wasn't, you're just saying that because it's girls. And then other people would go, it was excellent, and I'm only saying that because it's the girls. And I was just thinking, can we not just judge it just on its merits as a pay-per-view rather than having to include the fact that, oh, it's all women, that must affect it in some way. I just thought it was an excellent show with one of the best matches of the year, one of my favourite matches of the year, Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair in that last woman standing match, which was just awesome. Ronda Rousey again looked really good against Nikki Bella in the main event, even though the other match should have been the main event, but you know, it was alright. Even the matches that weren't supposed to impress very much actually did quite well. I'm thinking, for example, of Sasha, Bayley and Natalya against the Riot Squad, which turned out to be a better match than I could have ever anticipated, with the Riot Squad showing some really nifty teamwork. The main downside, I guess, was the open attrition leader against Alicia Fox and Mickie James, not only because Alexa Bliss was injured and couldn't compete, but because of that botched pinfall where the referee had to just stop his count because Alicia Fox sadly missed her cue. But we won't hold that against her too much because this was a pretty brilliant pay-per-view. To make things even better, we had two wonderful work rate matches. We had Shayna Baszler versus Kairi Sane, which did involve a little bit of sports entertainment towards the end with Shayna's MMA pals getting involved, but I didn't have a problem with it. A few people did, but I thought that actually they got involved in an organic way. Kairi Sane accidentally sort of got them involved by taking the action close to the crowd barrier, and Shayna Baszler won in dirty fashion, which she doesn't always do, but she's a heel, so she can sometimes do that, and it's fine. Toni Storm and Io Shirai also put on one hell of a match. Bit too short for my liking, but it was great in the final of the second ever Mae Young Classic. This pay-per-view on the whole gets an A. I thought it was wonderful. And from the heights of Evolution, we get to the reason Evolution existed in the first place, in the opinion of many. Maybe. Crown Jewel. Not gonna beat around the bush. The worst WWE pay-per-view of the year. Not just because of the controversy surrounding the whole murder of Jamal Khashoggi and that sort of thing, but also just as a wrestling show, this absolutely stank. And it was, of course, made worse by the whole uneasy political situation surrounding it and the fact that it shouldn't have gone ahead, probably. But you know what, at least WWE had the decency to leave us in no doubt that we shouldn't like this show by putting on their worst pay-per-view of 2018. Why was this so bad? Well, we had DX versus the Brothers of Destruction in the main event, which was a bit sad to watch, really. Triple H hurt himself and finished the match, fair play to him, but none of the lads looked that good. Shawn Michaels punched Kane's mask off and then Kane had to go and get his mask. Then Shawn did that moonsault and just broke his nose on the floor. It was hard to watch, and everyone was like, yeah, they're legends, crazy crowd reaction, fair enough, but wasn't easy to watch sat at home. We also had Brock Lesnar beating Braun Strowman in a matter of minutes thanks to the help of Baron Corbin to win back the Universal Championship, which Reigns had to sadly vacate due to his leukemia news, of course. We wish him a full recovery, but Lesnar is the champion again. It's like, oh, this is happening now, is it? He's going to be champ until Mania and lose it to somebody. And that looks like it's what's going to happen because at the time of recording, Lesnar is still the champion and we never ever see him. I forgot what he looks like. In my mind, I've got Glacier. And of course, Shane McMahon winning the World Cup to become the best wrestler in the world. This show gets an F grade. Now, the action was better than an F would imply for the most part. It was alright to poor rather than awful, but the booking was worse than awful. Fully deserving of its F grade. Let's hope they just don't go back to Saudi Arabia again. It's all going to kick off, isn't it? Oh dear. Next up, SmackDown being a little bitch. SmackDown being just Raw's little bitch. That's right. It's Survivor Series. So before we get on to SmackDown just being Raw's little bitch, we've got three great matches to consider as well. Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey was really cool, like a Goldberg versus Steven Regal kind of way, but less shooty and more legit, like a wrestling match that they planned out beforehand. But Ronda again showed another facet to her game, her excellent grappling and counters and stuff. Charlotte was trying to walk her through it, but Ronda was like, I've got this. They were both going toe to toe. It was excellent. The main event as well was one of my favourite matches of the year. Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar. Even though Bryan had turned heel, he was now WWE champion. Everyone was in his corner. No one was going to boom against Lesnar, and they booked it perfectly. Everyone thought Bryan was just hurt and injured and beaten down and maybe shouldn't have come back to wrestling for the first part of the match. Then he fought back and it was electrifying. And then Lesnar won, but it was still an excellent match. The third excellent match was the Cruiserweight title match, which is, it's been the highlight of a lot of pay-per-views in this list, which is fair enough. It was Mustafa Ali and Buddy Murphy, two of the best wrestlers this year in terms of shared chemistry with each other. Now, I've talked about the bad things, not going to waste too much time on them, but you might have heard that Enzo Amore showed up in the crowd uninvited, trying to cause a scene and distract from the action. And he did to an extent, he did. He picked the right match, he picked that tag team match, because the best thing that happened in that match was one of the most embarrassing wrestling moments I've ever been privy to. And I feel bad for Drake Maverick because he's a legend of the UK scene. I've met him, he's a really nice guy. But they did ask him to piss himself on pay-per-view. And yes, there's the whole debate over whether it was legit or whether it was worked urine, whether there was a little pipette that he squeezed in his pants. And I think it was that. But it just rendered Raw's tag division an utter joke. And it made me sad. It made me sad indeed. We also have to point out that SmackDown was just Raw's little bitch, lads. SmackDown lost every single match apart from the pre-show, which was apparently an accident. And then they had to just remedy that by pretending it never happened, much to the chagrin of Xavier Woods. Survivor Series gets a... let me think about this for a second. I'm going to err on the side of harshness and give it a B- because despite featuring 3 really cool matches, the bad stuff drags it down from a B or a B+ just to that B- because the bad stuff really was bad. And yeah, the Enzo stuff wasn't WWE's fault, but it did affect the show. We have to take it into account. And Drake Maverick, well, that was WWE's fault, and it did affect the show, and we're taking it into account. Also, just the general idea of SmackDown getting swept for no other reason than to make Raw look better, because it hasn't really been referenced much. Shane hasn't got his comeuppance for leading his team to utter failure or anything, so did that just happen so that we were reminded? Oh, Raw is the flagship brand, by the way. That's the one you want to watch on Monday nights. Like, I'm a SmackDown fan, really, and it really grinded my gears. And finally, the last WWE pay-per-view of 2018, tables, ladders and chairs. As the theme song said, December 16th, that's a Sunday, tables, ladders, chairs. Oh yeah, how good was the show? Let's take a look. First and foremost, AJ versus Bryan for the WWE title was great. Loved it, loved the finish, loved the pacing, loved the build-up, loved the intensity, loved all of that match. One of my favourite WWE matches of the year, main roster. And then Ronda Rousey got involved in the 3-way women's sort of TLC match between Asuka, Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. And I really didn't like that. And I expressed that and I got slated for it online. Everyone was going, it makes sense. I know it makes sense. I know Ronda's got beef with Charlotte and Becky, but I felt like it cheapened Asuka's win slightly. That shouldn't take away, though, from the fact that the match was an excellent one. Not as good for my money as Charlotte versus Becky in the last women's standing match at Evolution, but still intense and exciting and wild and all the things you want a TLC match to be. So they did themselves proud for the first ever women's TLC match. It was a really good effort by all 3 women. Ronda also looked really good in her victory over Nia Jax and got back some of the mojo that she was starting to lose a little bit, especially when Charlotte just beat the piss out of her at Survivor Series. I forgot to mention that. But at the same time, we have to talk about the length of the show. 12 matches long, including the pre-show. This one dragged and everyone put in a really good effort, so it was hard to like single out anyone for blame. But yeah, I found this one a slog to watch. I don't know if it's just because I was tired at the end of the year or anything. Christmas around the corner, guys. Or whether it genuinely was a long show. 12 matches is a hell of a lot, even if some of them are short. TLC closes out the year with a nice, lovely, juicy B grade. I think that's pretty much sums it up. That was 2018 graded. So Evolution gets the best grade of the year, an A. Watch all the comments, get like, just because the women's division were in it and you want to look cool and accepting, shut up. No, it was a really good show. I love the Royal Rumble as well. I thought that men's Royal Rumble match was absolutely superb. I thought the women's one was pretty damn good too. WrestleMania I enjoyed just because it was WrestleMania and big things happened, and the first half was excellent. Money in the Bank was an exciting show too. SummerSlam was an eventful show, if not quite as good as some of the others. But TakeOver like blew everything out of the water. But on the main roster, focusing on the main roster as we have done for the majority of this video, I thought it was an alright year for WWE. One of extremes. We had either really good shows or like Crown Jewel. And then we had Backlash or we had Greatest Royal Rumble. No wait, those were both bad. We had Backlash or we had Royal Rumble, hooray, there we go, that saved it. Yeah. A mixed bag, I think, and it's hard to be consistent when you put out so many pay-per-views. Some of them are obviously going to be worse than others, but I think on the whole, WWE's mission statement has been successful. I remember the moments more than the stories and the matches, and I had to consult my notes a lot, and I had to do a lot of research to remember some of the background to some of the matches, rather than the big moments like Charlotte beating up Ronda with a kendo stick, Undertaker squashing Cena at WrestleMania. It's just like, these are big moments, but they didn't really mean anything. Raw sweeping SmackDown for no reason. I don't know, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, that's your opinion. And let us know all of your opinions on this video in the comment section down below. So with all that in mind, for my overall grade for WWE's pay-per-views in 2018, I'm gonna give it A C+. There were some really good things, Evolution, the Royal Rumble. There were some really bad things, Crown Jewel. So I think that it's fair to give it a C+. The plus is because the big 4 pay-per-views were at least good and at worst eventful and memorable, so you can't really say fairer than that. So thank you very much for watching our graded of every main roster pay-per-view of 2018. We'll do this again next year. I can't wait. Haha. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to at Jack the Jobber. You can follow all of us at Cultaholic and check out our Patreon too if you wish. Patreon.com/Cultaholic. And never forget, of course, if you haven't done so already, to hit subscribe and to join us.